Something for your mind. Mind. Something for your mind. Mind. Something for your mind.
정신을 집어넣으세요. 어떤 것 필요합니까?
Something for your
정신을 집어넣으세요.
mind.
정신을 집어넣으세요.
Something for your
Welcome back to the latest edition of Let's Chew the Gum, the podcast where we talk about everything from A to Z. I'm your host, Protocol, and we're here chewing the gum. Who says you can't chew the gum and talk? We say you can. It gives us clarity, a little bit of a rhythm, and why not a little bit of fresh breath? You can find our podcasts on Spotify, YouTube, Spreaker, Breaker, Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, and other platforms. Feel free to reach out to us at letschewthegum@gmail.com or at protocol@gmail.com. That's PROTKALL@gmail.com. Today, we're so honored to have our guest in the studio. Our guest today is none other than Angela de Ramos, elementary school teacher from the Alisal Union School District in Salinas in Central California. She's also the state council rep at large for CTA Central Coast. She's the curator and administrator, producer of 2 online platforms that can be found on Facebook. One of them is This Side of the Chalkboard, and the other one is Central Coast Equity. We're so honored to have you, Angela. Please say hello to our listeners.
Hello there.
Indeed. Thank you.
Everyone's washing their hands and staying safe.
Yeah, indeed. Absolutely. I've washed my hands so many times, and it's something that I've always done, but I think now I'm just so much more conscientious of it. Someone had a joke. They said they've washed their hands so much that they found or uncovered a stamp from a club from 25 years ago. I thought, wow, that's that's something else. So we're here today really in this environment of distance education, teaching and learning, and because there's just so many facets to talk about and to think about, and a lot of things are coming up as we go along. This is new to quite a few people and especially our students. So I'm glad to have you in the studio today to just talk about some of the issues. And for the listeners, when I say in the studio, it's actually she's calling into the studio and we're patching her in. So we're practicing safe distancing as well. But yes, Angela,
yes, many feet away.
Right, many feet away. So I'm glad to have you in here just to talk about some of these issues, and I'd like for our audience to be able to share, in your expertise, and for you to share with the audience just some of the issues, whether it's equity or just how this thing is done and what does it look like, and the diversity that we have not only here in California but throughout the country. So I'm just going to open this up and we're going to have an organic conversation, and our listeners, I'm sure that they'll be engaged and appreciate what you have to offer. So how are you seeing this, and what are some things that we should be paying attention to when it comes to this distance education thing?
Well, thanks for having me, first of all. We've been, you talk about expertise, but the thing about this is it's unfolding as we go, and we're all, I'm by no means an expert. I'm not an expert teacher. I'm not an expert anything. I just tread water like anyone else. But I get the vantage point, at being in the classroom for over 2 decades, and then the work I do with our union, as well as the online stuff, gives me a sort of vantage point. So I've sort of been watching this thing unfold, and just making observations on a viewpoint where I'm kind of reading. There's a lot of online resources that popped up. Some of them within California, some of them statewide, some of them nationwide. So it's just really interesting to sort of see what's bubbling up. And so some of the things that I've just been noticing is the idea that someone should know what we're doing. First of all, I just want to say, we're all treading water. We're all making this up as we go with the resources we have. And so please, like, just give yourself and everyone else a bit of grace that, we're doing the best we can, and everybody, it's a good time to assume positive intent. Even when, this morning I was fielding some questions about MOUs. So MOUs are your memorandum of understanding. So, when we are in a profession like education, we have these agreements about what we think are best for the system. But all of this is completely changed. So, MOUs are sort of the agreements you make with your local administration, and people don't, our regular educators that aren't political and don't see that side of it, don't really realize, like, that stuff has to be made up as we go. And so as we're busy trying to figure out how we're going to do this online distance / remote / homeschooling learning, it's being sort of negotiated by local leadership. And now is a really good time to voice what's going on, what your concerns are, what your struggles are. So I really appreciate people weighing in, even if it's just a vent, because it gives me a pretty good sense of where people's struggles are. And then at the same time, I'm going through it too. I'm still in the classroom. I teach 6th grade this year. And, the considerations between the grade levels, between the districts, between the not just the grade level, it's the micro to the macro. All of it is important at this point. What I expect from my 6th graders is not what my colleague in 3rd grade or kindergarten or TK or special ed. Everybody's got sort of their own issues, which we know what they look like in the classroom, but I think they're exacerbated, or we're forced to re-examine all those sort of pedagogical concerns. And for a big portion of our kids, they end up being equity concerns. So you mentioned that I do some equity work. So a big concern is the language, access, and there are always the things that we're concerned about in school, but something as simple as I teach ELD. I teach in Salinas. A great many of my students come from households that English is not their first language. So even if they're born here, often they just have limited access to models of academic English. So it's really important for us to take our ELD seriously. So to not be able to read things like body language, like just as a classroom teacher, I'm realizing I can't get them to produce if they're not English speakers. Most of our online resources are coming in English. Then I really have to think more about my delivery and whether I'm translating it, making it accessible, and it just adds a whole layer to it. And I'm thinking, here I am, a veteran teacher. The standards are not a problem for me. Classroom management is not a problem for me. And I'm lucky to have really good tech resources. Our district was very forward-thinking in tech. So none of this should be a struggle for me. I am poised to be in a very good position to make that transition. And it's so hard. And really, the bottom line is that we don't, just not seeing our kids forces a whole other kind of pedagogy, like physically being in proximity, and how much I rely on body language and those unspoken forms of communication to check for understanding and all those kinds of things that we talk about as teachers. Those are the things that we don't codify. Those are the things that no one could ever measure in sort of a numerical metrics. It's sort of our craft, right?
Right. Absolutely.
So we can't rely on those things. And that has been something that I'm experiencing it. And so when I'm looking at all these, systems of how we're doing this, one of the problems that I think about standardizing or policy work, which is really about kind of standardizing it, is that it's not based on human interaction, but teaching is. So trying to, say, oh, how many times do I need to, what does that look like now? So how many times do I need to check on online? How much time is enough screen time or meeting time? Do I have to record it? Those kinds of things all try to quantify something that, before we sort of took for granted because they were in front of us and sort of captive audiences. So it's been definitely an interesting phenomena to watch. And I think my big takeaways and the thing I most want people to realize is, I guess it's kind of the union rah-rah speech, but it really is. I mean, you saw the power of educators come together and kind of figure this out, and we're still doing it. So now is a really good time to be communicating and with your colleagues and saying what is your, what's working, what's not working, what resources or supports do you need. Even if it's not your local, reach out to other people. Now we're all digital, so it's easy for us to be worldwide. I mean, a lot of the resources that have been the most valuable have been coming from other countries.
Absolutely.
Some of the Asian countries, I had educators early on contact me, from Korea and from China saying are we prepared, because they had already gone to remote learning. Probably a month and a half before we did, I started getting those messages. So it's been a good time to reach out and exercise, flex your professional muscle and calibrate. And also get support. I mean, you're not alone if you don't know what the hell you're doing. None of us do.
No, that's a great point. Great point, because I too have been in contact with colleagues across the nation, East Coast to West Coast and in between, just really looking at and listening to their concerns and then some of the things that they're doing that are working and not working. And as you said, we're all in this together. So it really is a time for people to, first of all, like I said, for everyone to really be forgiving of themselves if they don't know, and to not be adding additional pressure and stress on themselves for what they don't know, because many people are making it up as they go. But the networks that we have and the capabilities that we have to share resources and insights and really find out what works for you. Your point about, how are we assessing students now, right? I'm the same way in my classroom, no matter which level I'm teaching. I'm looking at body language to assess if students get it. I'm assessing in so many ways constantly, like as you said, the things that the average person doesn't know that occurs in the classroom or in a teaching profession. And in this online formats, it makes it difficult to do that. Like you said, how much am I giving enough? Are they grasping it? Do I move on from here? It's sort of a double blind situation in a sense. We don't know if our students are the ones doing the work, or are they, how much are they retaining, or how engaged they are, right? When we are in the classroom and we can see that they might be a little disengaged, we utilize mechanisms to get them back on task. And so we don't know that. And not only that, we don't have a full view of who's able to have sufficient access. Are they having to share computers with many siblings or relatives so that they can all access their material, and are they getting enough, right? That as we talked about before we started this session, we didn't record this part, but we were talking about just the diversity of needs and the diversity in communities of students that are able to access or have different lifestyles and non-traditional settings. So everything is in flux right now, right?
Yeah, or it's traditional. It's just not what. it's tradition. It could be someone else's tradition.
Oh yes,
to
indeed.
have multiple generations in a household, or where I live, it's very, very high density. You often have multiple families living in a single apartment. And so even if they have, I'm in a really, really, I said I was in a very blessed situation in terms of handling this. Just a little bit of background. My district, the LSL, just shout out to the LSL, in Salinas has, I feel like we've been preparing for this moment for like 5 years, because we actually had started piloting one-to-one years ago. And of course, like most pilots, it's a big hot mess. And, we have these carts and things would go missing. And we've just been working at it. And we've developed it to the point where we have a whole tech team who this is all they do is think through teaching using computers. And we had already started that journey, I'd say a couple of years ago. And even then, we have teachers. Our goal is to have everyone 100% Google certified. And I haven't done it. And I know how to use the tools. I have the resources. I have the coaches. So we're in a really good situation. Our kids all have one-to-one devices, or nearly all of them did. The TK did it, but we were able to solve that because we also have a hardware team. So like I said, we're really, really at an apex of being able to meet this, and we're still having a hard time. We have all the tools, we have all the resources, we have the philosophy behind it about, they're very equity minded. That's the reason why we're so tech driven, because tech isn't, it's a great, it's a tool if you're using it correctly. And I think my district they've really promoted the use of tech, not as a replacement for teachers, but as an enhancement. So that's why we have a whole PD series just around using tech as a tool. So I think the thought, everything behind it is there, and we're still, not reaching all our kids. So one issue is, just getting, even if they have the devices, is the teacher super comfortable? I'm not super comfortable. So am I able to give everything? No. And that's okay. They understand it. They're, we're being mindful of the limitations we have. A thing that I didn't anticipate is that everybody's getting bounced out because the internet there's such a drain on there's only so much broadband, or the program's crashing. That was the other thing that we you couldn't anticipate things like that. But the kids getting kicked off, like I can see them. So kind of getting the rhythm and the flow. And I kind of thought there's the same sort of analogy. I mean, some of the kids who weren't, when you have regular brick and mortar classrooms, like we did once upon a time pre-COVID,
Mm-hmm.
you still have a flow that a rhythm. So that's part of it, is sort of knowing the rhythm of when kids check in, seeing them get kicked off, understanding they don't have the resources. They might be sharing space and not have quiet. So, demanding that they speak, putting them on speakerphones means you're going to hear like 10 other people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Those are things that just, if you're not mindful of them, you should be mindful now.
Yeah, at least now,
and if
right?
you don't live in a community, because we are very segregated, part of the chatter that I'm seeing online is why do teachers keep harping on equity? But that is the reality of our a lot of our students, is that they don't live like you said, in quote, traditional, what you see on TV, every kid has their own bedroom and everyone has their own devices. It's not like that for everybody. So,
no, that equity portion is so critical. And for folks that don't understand that, when we talk about public education and access, if we have to have equity, and we have to be sensitive to that, because every child needs to have access. And, I know even in my home, a lot of the bandwidth that's utilized in my home during the day when I'm normally teaching is going toward home businesses, right? In other situations, you have multiple people online at the same time. And so some folks have an under or should I say less bandwidth to where, like, as you said, they're getting kicked off or the delivery is slow. And when you're talking about students or ELD or ELL students, right, if the delivery is slow and the language is already an issue and now you have issues with being cut off or it's choppy, that can be frustrating for kids. It can cause kids to check out. And there's just so many dynamics to that people don't understand. So equity, then the consideration for that is a must. And perhaps teachers harp on it because, and I don't like to use the word harp. I think a better term is to emphasize the need for it, is because it's a real thing. And you may not be experiencing, not you personally, but any one of our listeners, you may not be experiencing those issues, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be sensitive to those that are. I was mentioning to someone, I was homeless the last year and a half of high school. And so you're telling me now to, access from home. Well, where's that? Oftentimes my home was on the back of a bus riding, or sometimes my home is, I'm in a park most of the day because I had no place to go. So I'm just, how do I access? And am I, because of a situation of poverty, am I not as worthy to access, or does that mean I don't count as much? And I think that's the reason that we advocate for our students, whether it's in unions or whether it's attending LCAP meetings to where we're emphasizing our needs. That's the reason, because oftentimes our students and some of our teachers may not have a voice to express their needs. And so it's really on us as educators and leaders to make sure that we are that voice for the students. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, and I think that the narrative always is like, well, this is what I've been hearing, and it goes along. I mean, racism is racism, right? It's oh, we can't move on because of those kids. That's sort of the short version of the well, why, the no new learning, or whether this is enrichment only. That's been a big part of the discussion right now. And I don't think it's like, why do we have to hold up everyone because some kids don't have access? It's more, I think the question is, what are we holding people accountable to? If you have a population, or like I differentiate my class. I have some kids who are checking in and some kids who are not checking in. Will I hold everything up for the kids who are not checking in? No, but I'm absolutely mindful of who is and who isn't. And those kids who aren't checking in, I'm going to modify and do what I need to do, whether that means I need to call more, reach out, note that maybe I have one student who's getting kicked out now of their home. So on top of all of this, they are about to be homeless. So, my work with them is sort of connecting them with the family resource people, or, trying, at the very least, being empathetic and not expecting. So it's about the expectation of what we're doing. And that goes to that deeper thing. And here's where the opportunity is. We're always looking at this as a deficit mode, but I think this is a golden opportunity for us to say, what do kids need to learn? And how can we best teach them? Because now we're having to redo everything. But even when we're in a brick and mortar, those questions still exist. What are we teaching? For what purpose? How are we giving that delivery? So, differentiation and understanding what kids bring and what their situations are. It's that human thing. It's understanding that teaching and learning is human, and knowing all the parts of them as humans, including where they live and what their support systems are like, and all of that matters.
Absolutely.
So,
it matters. In our, it's the same thing we doing in the class, as you said, in a brick and mortar classroom daily, where we're differentiating and we're making accommodations for our students based upon their particular situations at home, or their learning styles, or their particular needs. And this is just an extension of that. And I'm not sure that the general audience necessarily, again, knows what goes on in the classroom in terms of making those accommodations and differentiating instruction for students, because they all aren't the same. And so we have to provide tools, and we implement various mechanisms, and we, again, differentiate based upon that. And that's where equity comes in. We try to help students to be able to access the best way they can, and the best ways that we know how, for them to have a successful experience. And it's no different now. I mean, it's different, but it's just a different way of going about it. I want to touch upon something that you brought up earlier. You were saying that your district, you guys had been really planning for this, not planning for this to happen, but planning for situations with one-on-one, and planning for this type of model where students have access and with technology for some time, yet you're still having some difficulties, right? And I just couldn't help but think about the districts and the students that not necessarily haven't planned for this, but may not have had the mechanisms or the resources, depending on their community or their particular budgets, to be able to prepare for this. So if districts like yours have been planning and it's difficult, imagine how much more it is difficult for educators and students who have not had that benefit to plan and prepare for this.
Right. And just knowing how much energy and thought and planning and policy and money has gone into developing us to where we are. I keep thinking, I see these districts that are getting, mass donations of computers, or mass purchasing of computers. Well, there's still the servicing of computers when they break.
Right.
I mean, just something as simple as that. Like we think, okay, and I know it's one step at a time, but there's so much consideration. And then there's the learning piece of it, just because my kids have had computers one-on-one for years. But have I made good on all the equipment and the tools at my disposal? No. I've, really made only recently an effort to explore Google Classroom. Every year I like to set a learning goal for myself. So that actually was one of my learning goals this year, was to actually use Google Classroom as a tool. So I had already been playing around with it, started using it. And honestly, I was stepping away from using it just because I was, report cards were coming up. And it was so much easier to resort back to sort of the traditional ways of pen and paper kind of ways of doing things. So I'm observing myself as a learner, and the ebb and flow, and the 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing, with all the supports and that I have at my fingertips. And I really empathize with those teachers who are being asked to teach in this completely new way, because it's not equitable for anybody in that situation. We're not on a level playing field by any means.
No, not at all. Not at all.
So,
I've worked with Google Classroom and some of the technologies, and I'm happy to say that I'm not having difficulties with this format, because I've done it for some years, whether students were on independent study, or I've just always had it set up for students who, for whatever reason, if they miss class, here's the format and here's what we've done each day. But I'm very sensitive to the fact that there are others who have not. And I don't think it is a bad thing. I think, again, as you said, it presents an opportunity for us to re-examine, again, not only what we teach and why, but the ways that teaching is possible. So, once this is all over and folks go back to the LCAP, for those outside of California, the LCAP is our funding formula, or not the funding formula, it's the local control accountability plan that where stakeholders can have a say.
The mechanism.
Right, the mechanism for in the ways in which we fund our local schools through the funding we receive from the state. And so,
how are we gonna spend the money?
There you go. That's the bottom line. How are we going to spend the money? And so if your voice, again, is not being heard, there's a chance that the needs that you have won't be implemented, because regardless, there's only so much to go around. And if it's not seen as a necessity or a need, then funds may not flow into the programs or services within your district. So it is very important that parents, teachers, and other stakeholders attend those meetings, take them seriously, or at least have a representative from a group that you're a part of to go and attend on your behalf to make sure that your voice is heard. Because as we see, this is important, and there's not every district where there's going to be people who have the funding to donate massive amount of computers, whether the idea of that they need to be repaired later on or not, but it just doesn't happen. And so again, we're in this all together, and we have to find creative ways to support each other. Just really quick, you're listening to Let's Chew the Gum, the podcast where we talk about everything from A to Z while we chew the gum. You can find us on most podcast platforms. We're on Facebook, Instagram. You can find us on Spotify, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, iTunes. We're all over the place, and for the reason that the information that our guests bring to our audience, we feel, and I feel specifically, that it is really important, and so we just want to get the message out there. Always feel free to call into the show or email us if you have topics you want to discuss, or if you'd like to be a guest on the show. Again, you can reach us at letschewthegum@gmail.com. or at protocol@gmail.com. That's PROTKALL@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to have you. Also, if you'd like to support the show, you can log into our Anchor website at that would be anchor.fm/protocol. And there's a button where you can support the show if you like what you're hearing. So we welcome that. Again, my guest today is Angela de Ramos, elementary school teacher in the Alisal Union School District, and she's also an advocate for teachers and students throughout the state. And you can check her out on Facebook through some of her social media platforms, such as This Side of the Chalkboard and Central Coast Equity, CTA Central Coast Equity. I hope I said that correctly. Again, we'll continue with the conversation. So where do we go from here, Angela? Where do we go from here? There's opportunities. How can we, as educators, as educational leaders and parents, how can we come together post COVID-19 to refashion this thing that we call education and the delivery of education? Before you answer, let me take a quick break for our sponsors, and then I'll have you answer that right when we come back. You're listening to Let's Chew the Gum, the podcast where we talk about everything from A to Z. We'll be right back.
Something for your mind.
If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it could be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. You can make money from your podcast also, with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So what are you waiting for? Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
Thank you to our sponsors. Okay, we're back with our guest, Angela de Ramos. Before we went to break, I was asking, how does this post-COVID-19, or how do you see the post-COVID-19 educational system panning out? And so for our listeners, go ahead and please respond to that question.
Well, I'm going to give a short-term thing and a long-term thing. I think the short-term thing this is sort of meta, but I would really like educators to sort of note their learning curve. It makes us so much more empathetic as teachers to be that projective struggle of not knowing what we're doing, and our students go through that all the time. So it gives us a little grace with them. It gives us a little bit of grace for ourselves that we're sort of learning it. And it occurs to me that using online technology is very constructivist learning, that you sort of just have to do it. It's really hard to just learn it from a book or learn it from watching it. You just kind of have to play around with it. So that's my sort of short takeaway. My longer term takeaway is I think really define that question, hold that what are you choosing to teach, and how are we going to do that? What is the best case scenario? Why are we choosing that? I think actually that works in the short term right now too, as we're organizing as a profession. We're all kind of on literal survival mode right now. So it's a little strange to be talking about standards and graduations and requirements and grading. And it's sort of like, can we just sort of survive this first? And when we're done, one thing that I've sort of started playing around with this idea of articulation. So, we as a system in this country, and I think most countries, have standards-based where, we're expecting every kid to be at a certain place or know a certain thing or have a certain skill at a certain time. And I think that's always been a lofty goal, but not necessarily reality. It's like sometimes I think of it as asking every kid to be a certain height at a certain age. Mm-hmm. I mean, we have general recommendations based on trends, but, there's a lot of factors there and a lot of variables. So, and variance. So, kind of talking, I've been talking to teachers in other grade levels and above me, kind of asking, okay, as a system, knowing my kids are going to be missing some things, which they always do, how do we make this more of a continuum of what's important? So the idea of defining what's important for us and the world that we know and the grade level or the standards that we know ourselves, and then where does that fit in a lifetime of learning? Those kinds of, let's reinvent the standards, shall we? But I mean, that's kind of what I feel like could be an outcome of this, is that we start to sort of define. I think one of the things about our profession is we rely on other people to tell us what to do. Sometimes I think we're not really a profession because we don't sort of take charge of our tools or testing or, the way that lawyers or doctors do. So if we were to do that, we should be defining all the things that govern us. But in this particular moment, we literally have to pick and choose what it is that we're going to deliver because we can't do everything. So we're having to sort of think through what we have access to in terms of the delivery mechanism, what the kids can show us, and but the deeper thing is what are the standards and what's important for them to be successful the next year and for the rest of their lives. Mm-hmm. What that looks like for me is I'm looking at things really sort of basic life skills and sort of fitting them into what they look like in terms of my standards, and really trying to deliver that right now because, counting back money and manipulating decimals, calculating tips and fractions, which happens to be my grade level, but things like that where they would need life skills. And then what does that translate to for for 7th grade, for 8th grade, for 9th grade, or lower? So those are some bigger things. And I think, the earlier we have these conversations of what we're doing, what we should be doing, and let go of when they should be happening, I think we inch closer towards equity in general all the time.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. I know in my class, I'm always mindful of the standards and, but I've always been big on, I teach history at the high school level, and at the university level, I teach in a teacher preparation program, and I'm always speaking to students at all those levels about, in my history class, if you leave here and the only thing you've learned is history, you've missed the point, because there's so many life lessons that we and skill sets that we emphasize, teaching students and helping them to understand how to learn for themselves if the teacher isn't around, how to take the initiative to find out what you know. I frequently tell my students, I'm not so much concerned with the answers you give as I am with the questions you ask, because I'm a firm believer that if you can ask good questions, you'll get the answers, because the mind is naturally inquisitive and wants to get answers to questions that you have. I can ask you a bunch of questions. It may not interest you or motivate you or engage you to learn them. I can make it grade dependent, and then you'll do it. But that's more on a behavioralist type of side. I'm more interested in what questions can you develop for yourself, because then you'll be motivated to find those answers. And then we can talk about and start to implement ways in which you go about finding those answers. So now we're talking about skill sets, whether it's research. So I'm going to help you in some ways to be able to disseminate, not to disseminate, but to really be critical of the resources that you use when you find an answers. How do I know that this is a valid answer? How can I cross compare? And I just think that if I help you to understand, if you don't know what you know, then possibly you'll know how to find that out, if that makes sense. So those types of ways.
No, actually, what you said really resonates with what's happening now, because I think that's actually a really good. I think you that question of the right answer versus how you got the answer, or how you're conceptualizing it, and the questions you ask. That's really a good way to approach technology right now too. If you have listeners who are sort of struggling with the use of technology and how much screen time and what does pedagogy online look like, and what I'm observing is that there's sort of two camps. One is basically glorified worksheets, and those are the teacher-approved programs, right? It's like it gets the right answer and it automatically, there's some algorithm that pushes them through the next level, and those are plug and play kind of ready-made, and you see a lot of those on the market. And there's a place for those, but that doesn't replace the teaching. And the teaching right now, the tool would be for the teacher is using online resources to curate, for the students to curate sort of a digital portfolio of their learning. So like what you were saying, what are the resources you're using? How are you analyzing it? The questions, like all those things. The best uses of tech that I've seen that my district pushes us towards is using it as a tool of discovery and documenting it. So, like Google Classroom really is just an organizational device, really. But that's perfect if you're approaching it in the way you just said. Now, the trick for the teacher is, our teacher tools in our classrooms are folders, our notebooks, citations, things like that. Well, that looks a little different online. There's a little bit of a different workflow, but those things are still there. So I think, good teaching and it is never about the right answer. It's about the process of learning and being able to be metacognitive about that and documenting it, because Absolutely. Then you keep going.
Yeah, I'm very much into the process as opposed. The product is important, but the process, I think there's so much along the way that you learn that doesn't always show up in the product, but it's transferable to other areas of life. And so in that process, the way you go about it and the things you discover about yourself and the growth of your mind and your brain that it entails. And as you said, when you document it, right, sometimes I've seen students, it's just a beautiful thing to see the light come on to where they become more independent learners, because through the process and the ways that we discuss about how to learn and how to access information and how to utilize it. And maybe there was an essential question or just a general question at the beginning and they were just lost. But then all of a sudden it just hits and the light comes on and they're like, oh, I see. This is not just about history. This was about the ways of learning, brain development, skill sets. And I often hear, I was able to use what we used in your history class, and now it helped me to be better in math because it's a process. And I understand that when I'm lost, I'm not feeling stressed out and all these affective filters are going up, and I realize there's a process I can go through. So now I can sit back and breathe and have faith that if I go through the process, I'll get to the product or the end result that I want. And if I don't, I know how to go and even ask or find resources to help me with what I don't know. And I think in this time that we're in with this distance education, those students and teachers that can implement those skill sets or that have those skill sets may find it a bit less threatening. They may find some ease and comfort in the fact of knowing that, you know what, it's okay that I don't know now, but because I know I don't know, I can do something about it. And I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah, we've been using a hashtag in our own district, #yet.
How about that?
You don't know it yet.
Yeah, I like that.
But it's okay.
That's right.
We'll figure it out.
That's right. It's okay to have a problem. I tell my students it's okay to have problems, and I open up and talk to them about learning disabilities that I think I had. I was never diagnosed, but I've traditionally been a very slow reader, from kindergarten on, and I used to think I was just not as smart as the other kids and that I couldn't do what they did. And through some self-discovery, I realized, you know what? Well, there's some things that I may have to do differently than other kids do in terms of processing, retention, comprehension, etc. But that's my process, and it's okay. And I don't have to do it the way other students have done it. I don't have to be on the same time frame. But if I go through my own process, I can experience success. And students are, oh, you had learning disabilities. And I admit it, I say even through, 5 college degrees, I say, you know what, even through that, I struggled, but I did something about it. So it's okay. And so I want students and even the audience to know that it's okay to have a problem. It's not okay to not do something about it. That's what I say. And I try to, be that revealing with my students because I want them to feel comfortable that if I can say this about myself, I'm supposed to be the teacher and all these degrees, et cetera, but if I can reveal that to you, I hope that it eases your tension with what you're going through. And I found that over the years that it has worked. And students have come up and said, thank you for saying that. I feel so much better about, and then they start to reveal issues that they have. And before you know it, they've talked about it. They've become okay with it. And now they're doing things about it. And I know that's a little bit different than our general discussion, but I think it definitely applies in this situation because you have a lot of people in situations now where it's not the same, and they're going to have to find and have some ways to deal with the unknown, and they're going to have to hopefully find a little bit of comfort in that and knowing that it's okay and that they have some resources and some abilities to do something about it. And obviously that's not everybody, but for who it applies, let's let that sink in and help you find some comfort in that.
Yep. Here.
Yeah, here. No, that's it's been great having this conversation with you, and there's so much more that we could discuss and talk about it. But I do just again want to reemphasize some of your points that issues of equity are at the forefront, and we need to address that within our districts and within ourselves. We need to be a lot forgiving of ourselves when we don't know, when we're struggling, because teachers are people too, and they react the same ways as anyone else, and so we need to be forgiving. I don't know it, like you said, your hashtag yet, right? I don't know what this looks like yet, but I'm committed to myself and to my students to find out how and to do the best we can. And you know what? I think when this is all over, what this looks like on the other end, I think that once this is over and we have those meetings wherever they may occur and we are reviewing the standards, etc., I think it's going to just organically happen that a lot of the old ways are going to be thrown out and folks are going to really see, what it is or what's important to teach. What are some new ways that we need to teach and some things we need to focus on? I think that's just going to happen. And folks, as one of my guests in another episode said, are going to be a lot better off on the other side because of this. So there are some positives that we can take from this, and being that we're in this together, we'll get through this together and be better on the other side. But it's going to take us to continue to share and have input and utilize our voices and our platforms, such as you do with your shows and with the areas in which you advocate. So I thank you for that as well.
Well, thanks for having me and having this conversation. It's been interesting to chew on this, like you said, and we're so alone. So talking about it helps me. It's getting me to frame this in ways that I think I can, we have work to do.
Yes, we do.
We got work to do.
No, that's a great point. Talking about it is essential because we right now find ourselves somewhat isolated because of the social distancing and something that's new. And so again, we have to forgive ourselves and keep talking. So I'm inviting anyone and everyone to talk about it. And I'm always here. And you can reach out to my guest, Angela de Ramos, on Facebook and through her platforms, This Side of the Chalkboard. I know there's specific content that goes there, but how about, are there other ways that our listeners can reach out to you, email accounts, et cetera, where you could be reached if they have further questions or comments for you?
Yeah, they could reach me at Angela Der, that's ANGELADER 41 @gmail.com. And then I'm on Facebook under Angela de Ramos, so you can always reach me out in there, Messenger.
Okay, well, thank you so much. This has definitely been an enlightening conversation. You have been listening to Let's Chew the Gum, the podcast where we talk about everything from A to Z. Our guest today was Angela de Ramos, elementary school teacher in the Central Coast of California, student and teacher advocate. It's been great. So we thank you, and remember, we always have
Something for your